Throughout the 90s, fusion and dance electronica had been at the cutting edge of popular music. But towards the end of the 90s, one of the biggest world music hits of all time would emerge. And instead of looking to the future, it would make the world audience turn towards a vanished past.
The original idea for the album that became Buena Vista Social Club was a collaboration of some Malian musicians and some Cuban musicians. And then I thought it might be quite nice to see if Ry Cooder might be interested in working on it as well. But then just before we were supposed to make the trip, I learned that the Malians couldn't come. So I told Ry that we couldn't get the effort. He said, let's go anyway and see what happens.
Ry Cooder and World Circuit's Nick Gold had worked together with musicians around the world, but never in Cuba. With an album to record and musicians to find, they turned to local band leader Juan de Marcos Gonzalez.
I was the one that selected the musicians because Nick knew, of course, the music, but he didn't know the people.
Marcus would say, I've found this musician, I've found that musician. And a lot of those musicians, they hadn't played or sung for a long, long time. You know, they had their glory days in the 50s, when they were massive stars in the 50s. So to come back into the studio was just incredible. In particular for Ruben. You'd get to the studio and he was sat there waiting at the door, and he'd unlock the studio and he'd sort of this little shuffling run, he'd run to the piano and open it, and he'd play and he'd play and he'd play and he'd play all day.
Un, dos, tres.
Y llegando bailadores coman ra. Por lo camino atascado.
People were suggesting songs all the time, and they weren't suggesting them by saying, can I do this song? They were just playing them. But they'd all be playing their own songs at the same time in the studio.
It was like a laboratory, everything was flowing.
I remember at one point we were doing, we wanted to do a Dos Gardenias, a bolero, and I think Puntiita was singing it, but he's got a very sort of hard declamatory voice, and I asked if there was a singer with a softer voice to sing it, and Marcus sort of stood there and he went, yes! He sort of beamed and literally ran out the studio. An hour, 2 hours later, he came back in with this man who was just, I mean, he was a beautiful man. He sort of walked like a cat.
Grabando, por favor. Viene.
And it was Ibrahim Ferrer, and he started to sing this song.
Y me puse a cantarle de ahí, digo, compadre, coge ahí este tono, y me puse, dos gardenias para ti. Dos gardenias para ti, con ella quiero decir, te quiero. Te adoro, mi vida. Ponle toda tu atención, que serán tu corazón y el mío.
After the Cuban Revolution in 1959, the communist government began closing nightclubs and entertainment venues, including the once famous Buena Vista Social Club. Musicians were out of work, and before long, even their music fell out of fashion. Relics of a forgotten past.
The room that we recorded in was this gorgeous room built in the 50s by a record company called Panart in these tiny little back streets of Cuba. You sort of would go in this little room, wind up these stairs, and sort of this huge, beautiful room would be revealed to you. Ry wanted everything mic'd ambiently because he fell in love with the room.
Los nardos y las rosas, las blancas azucenas.
At the time, the Cubans would separate everything, close mic everything as possibly as they could. So the whole idea of recording them ambiently was very, very unusual then. Originally, in the 50s, they would have recorded like that.
The Buena Vista Social Club sounds like a rehearsal in your house. Like if you have all of these outstanding old guys surrounding you, having a drink or smoking good cigars and singing for you. And this was very special.
At the end of the recording, we were elated because, you know, we finished and you play the music back and really it was very apparent that something wonderful was there.
When the album was released, few outside the increasingly niche world music market took much notice. Then suddenly, sales started to rise and rise.
I don't know, maybe a few 100,000 I thought we'd sell. But, yeah, it sold millions. You did start to hear it everywhere. You'd go to a cafe and you'd hear it. You'd go to a bar and you'd hear it. Your mum's friend had heard it. Your neighbour had heard it. For a little while, it was sort of inescapable.
Before long, the Buena Vista Social Club album became synonymous with a growing high street coffee culture and a familiar soundtrack at many dinner parties.
The great triumph of the Buena Vista Social Club record was marketing. World Circuit Records are masters of marketing and presentation. It looked beautiful.
We sent out hundreds and hundreds of copies, and you know, because we just thought there was something special there.
A year after recording, the original lineup embarked on a tour of Europe and the US.
When we called them to go on tour, was the first time in years that they went out of the country. In years.
Now, touring with them was fantastic. They were very excited. And, you know, the rider was great. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't beer on the rider, it was warm milk, which was quite nice.
My wife became the nurse for the old guys to give them the medicines because they were musicians. And they forgot the medicines.
One of the stops on the tour was playing at Carnegie Hall, New York's leading concert venue.
I think that would have been the first time nearly all of them had been to the States. There was an embargo, we shouldn't forget. They didn't just not play there because they chose not to play there. They weren't allowed to play there.
For the past 40 years, the relationship between Cuba and the USA had been marked with fear and distrust. Since then, Cuba had remained cut off from its neighbouring superpower.
Very rare chance that we got these licenses to bring them into play. So, you know, America hadn't seen them. It wasn't just that they hadn't seen America. America hadn't seen them. They walked on stage and the place erupted. And it's loud, that place, when it's full. And you know, it was, you know, a shiver goes up your spine. There was a huge sort of warmth coming from the audience to the stage, and they really played. Marcos had them, you know, he was firing them up.
It was very important to play there and to see the response of the audience. The people standing, the people clapping and singing the Cuban music, the music we grew up with. It was unbelievable.
It was a story made for cinema, and luckily, director Wim Wenders was there to film it all. When his documentary was nominated for an Oscar, the old players of the Buena Vista Social Club became global stars on screen as well as on stage.
Now everybody, after the success of the Buena Vista, wanted to make money with the name. spirit of Buena Vista, the passion of Buena Vista, life from Buena Vista, the bar at Buena Vista. Even Nick had to make a trademark of the name.
People started recording a lot of old Cubans after that. Well, I got asked a lot, you know, when's the next Buena Vista, what's happening next, what's next, you know, and so, let's do a Buena Vista there, or let's do a Buena Vista here, which I found a bit weird, because it was very not contrived, this thing. It was, you know, we partly made it by accident.
Accident or not, the Buena Vista Social Club album hit a key formula for success. Through repackaging Cuba's abandoned musical past, it presented a very different country before the days of communism and embargoes. In an age of increasing globalization, the feeling of stepping into a world on the verge of disappearance seemed irresistible.